silent valve.
So the recording is started. The recording is
I
started.
think he wants us to know that.
Just so you know. And we're beginning.
Zip it.
What?
Okay, the recording is started and we are beginning.
Zip it. That's number
All
6.
right.
It's Joe's birthday today.
All
Oh,
Happy birthday, Joe!
Where's the cake?
Happy
All right,
birthday.
happy birthday, Joe! Wow! And you're spending your birthday here.
Yep.
That is so
I'm older
sweet.
than dirt.
Okay, I believe that. All right.
Okay.
70?
We're really throwing compliments.
Oh, it's the big 7-0. Wow.
Big 7.
Yeah.
Don and Joe were in the same class,
Yeah,
right?
Don and I graduated
Yeah, they
together.
graduated.
Well,
together.
Gail and
Mountains
Avon are
Finals.
here calling you a youngin'.
Youngins. And Paulie. Paulie had youngins too.
I got a few years on you, Joe.
Right.
Yeah, a couple tens.
Okay. So, online we got Linda and someone we're waiting for a name, might be Chris, and Gail and Avon. And then we got Audrey, we got Jan, we got Pauline. Hey Pauline, look this way. They see you. We got Steve, we got Joe, whose birthday it is, and he's feeling all 70 now. And then we got
There's Chris.
Beth, and
That's
we
Linda.
got.
Oh, are we
Linda,
so
yeah, and
into
Chris.
it?
All right, okay, Chris is saluting, all
Better
right.
looking than Chris.
Okay, so,
Can't do that.
Joe, since it's your birthday, why don't you open us up with a little bag? There's your birthday present.
Father, thank you for the beautiful weather today and the rain we've gotten in the last few days, and thanks for bringing everybody back together tonight. And be with Pastor Jeff as he gives your word to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, as a reminder to everybody, this is our last class on the history of the Bible and its development. We're going to finish it up tonight. And then next Wednesday, we begin the book of Daniel. Okay, and so then we'll begin studying the book of Daniel next Wednesday. All right? So now, before we get going here, does anyone have any questions from any of the stuff we've talked about the past 3 sessions on this? Anybody at all? That includes you, Chris and Linda. All right, good to go. Yep. Hey, and Chris, when you're not talking, if you could just make sure you mute yourself, that way we don't get any background noise. There you go. Excellent, thank you. All right, anybody though here, any questions or thoughts? That last 3?
It's a wonder there was a Bible written. It's a wonder we have this.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this,
All
but,
that goes, all history
Quite true.
and all
But-
this stuff.
and, okay, and you see, that's one of the things, this whole history though, it's one of the things that makes that such a unique book. In all of the history of all writings, there is no book like that, none whatsoever. And that we can go back to the original manuscripts, the most original manuscripts we have, and translate it, and it still is what you got in there. And for some, myself included, that's kind of the real proof that God was involved.
Yes.
Because we're too stupid to do that. Shakespeare, they debate a lot of Shakespeare's plays, were they actually written by Shakespeare or not? Because sometimes they get a manuscript that's maybe within a couple hundred years of when Shakespeare supposedly wrote it, and it's not like what we have as Shakespeare's plays today. It's different. And they say, oh, look at the changes that have been made. And changes were made in that. And that's just that. Same thing goes with Plato, Aristotle, any of their works. so that we have the Bible as we have it, and that it is so closely to what, that in itself is just proof of God's hand in keeping it
It's
all
amazing.
those,
It is amazing.
yeah, thousands of years.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, there's no other book like it around, there really isn't. So,
That's all I have to say.
yeah, no, thanks, no, that's a great comment, appreciate it, Jan, yeah.
Well, it's a wonder the Nazis didn't have their own version.
They did,
Oh, it's not on here.
this is yeah, so what we're doing today is we're focusing on America,
Oh, okay, sorry.
okay?
We're
And,
Americans. We're Americans.
Will you shut up?
yes,
We're American.
well, the Nazis are a whole different thing, they ended up taking my
Our thing.
oath and turning it into their Bible. But that's a whole different story. So anyway, in colonial America, now we're gonna focus on America because it's right here in America where we're the ones now responsible for all the lots of different editions and translations that are out there. There were translations in other languages that are made. Believe it or not though, most of those other translations in other languages, they use one of America's basic translation, like the NIV, and then they translate that into the other language. Okay, so Chinese Bible, Russian Bibles, the Orthodox, they don't go back to the most original and then say, here, we're making our own type of edition. A lot of it is just taking from what already was and doing it. The Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, it takes from the Latin Vulgate and translates it into modern Russian. And same thing with most of the Eastern Orthodox churches, but not, they don't make their own version as we do today. And so in America, we have all this, so now what we're doing is, in the history of the Bible, what happens is when you get into modern times, and modern is defined as from colonial America to the present. In Bible history, yeah, that's modern times. Your focus all of a sudden narrows down to America. And so in colonial America in the beginning, the New England colonies had the Geneva Bible, and the rest of the colonies had the King James Bible. Okay, and that's kind of how it starts off. Now what happens over in England? They make the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Okay, kind of like our American Bible Society much later on. But England starts this, and their propagation of the gospel was for here in the American colonies. And of course, this being done in England, they are going to be pushing the King James Version. And so a guy named John Eliot comes over in 1630. In 1630, there was a big immigration from England here to the colonies. And they landed in what is today Massachusetts, in that area. But it was a huge immigration. Over 50 ships of people came in during that time. My ancestors came in during that time from my mother's side. The Finches, they came in that time. So, and along with this guy named John Eliot. And John Eliot takes the King James Bible, and he is a missionary to the Indian population in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And he translates the King James Bible into the Indian language. He does the whole Bible. Okay, so that is kind of a big deal because that's one of the first times they're taking a Bible here in America and they're translating it into native tongue to reach out to them and to teach them Scripture. It is also the time period, because of this Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, that the King James really infiltrates into the New England colonies. So they starts off with Geneva Bible, but then King James is infiltrating because of this group coming, boom, and bringing it in. Now, from the time of the Revolutionary War all the way up to around the Civil War, a real important person for the Bible, the printing of the Bible here in America and stuff, was primarily the King James Version. The Geneva Bible doesn't get printed up a lot. It's primarily the King James because it's financed by England, by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. And so there's multiple printings of the King James here in America. During the Revolutionary War, there was a guy named Robert Ankin, who's a publisher and printer down in Philadelphia. And well, because we're having a revolution against England, and we don't like kings anymore, Atkin makes his own Bible for the revolution. And
do we know who did the
but what
translation?
Atkin does, now get it, understand, Atkin's just a lay person. I'm sorry, what'd you ask?
Do we know who did the translation for that? or-
Well, that's what I was getting to.
Oh, excuse me.
Atkin is just a lay person, okay, and he's a businessman. But he's a Christian, and he's a businessman. So all he does is he takes the King James Bible and he's gonna translate the King James Bible from that highfalutin English language to American. For what passed as American at that time. And Congress gets several clergymen to review it, and then they approve it. And it becomes the only congressionally authorized Bible in the history of our country. The Atkins Bible. And then Atkin, of course, mass produces it and prints it. Kind of like a nice monopoly. And he makes a lot of money off of it. But you can still find Atkins Bibles for sale today. I mean, there's still copies that exist, and it gets shared with a lot. But it is essentially a King James Bible just put into more American English at the time. That's all it is.
There's a whole lot of difference on there, yes.
No, there's no difference at all. It's just,
E's and thous are
now
changed.
you see what he takes out from it is both in the Geneva Bible and the King James Bible at the time, there's all these explanatory notes. The Geneva Bible's explanatory notes theologically says why kings aren't good. You know, where Samuel is talking to God and God's telling them, well, the people are getting a king because they reject me, God. So the Geneva Bible, it focuses on that and says, you see, kings aren't good. The King James Bible does exactly the opposite. It says, you see, kings are ordained by God. And all these kings are actually ordained by God. And so if you go against the king, then you're going against God. And it points to things like David's fight with Saul and how David, even though Saul's trying to kill him, won't harm him and stuff. And so what Atkins Bible does is it eliminates all those notes to kind of purify it so that you're not getting any kind of slant one way or the other. It's just a Bible. Now, what happens is the bishop, there's a Catholic bishop gets assigned here. And lo and behold, you know, they're down in Maryland. And one thing they notice, gee, there's a lot of Protestant Bibles around here. And all we got is this stupid Latin thing. And we ain't making any headway here. The Catholic faith's dying on a vine here in America. And what we gonna do about it? So he gets permission from the Pope to translate the Latin Vulgate into English and to allow it to be distributed. And so they take first this 1582 English translation that was just done by some friars just for use within the monastery in England. And they end up then, well, it was done in France, and that's why it's got this strange title of Doré Reims, because those are two towns in France, and the monastery sits athwart those two towns. And then what they do is they finish it out and complete that whole translation for the rest of it using the Latin Vulgate. And then this is to be a Catholic Bible to counter the King James Bible. Yes, dear.
We go from an A to a D, are we
Oh,
missing
well.
a B and C somewhere?
Yeah, I missed it.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure everyone was
I
listening.
didn't even know that.
Oh, she notices all
Well, I
this.
should have
I'm
known
glad she
that.
pointed that out.
And
Yeah.
the one the kids were singing.
We gotta keep it in
Okay,
mind.
so on my handout, Audrey pointed I went out from an A to a D, and I missed B and C in there. My apologies.
Something.
So do we change
And
the
this is a
C to B?
professor. Audrey, this is a professor. Watch out, next week they'll make you do it.
That's right, that's right.
Oh,
So
no,
we're
you
really not
should
listening.
see after Sunday. She'll tell me all the mistakes I made in my slides and stuff.
It's better Audrey than Barbara.
Oh, well, Barbara gets around to
That's
it.
another subject.
All right, then, after the country started up and everything, and we're going to town, there's this guy named Charles Thompson, who's the secretary to the Continental Congress, and he's also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he's one of the people who helped draft the Constitution. And he's a professor in Greek and Latin, and he's a Federalist. Okay, he's of what's called the Federalist Party. That's the party of George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, all that group. But anyway, Alexander Hamilton says, you know, we need to have a good translation that's American. Atkins just used that King James Bible. We need something that's actually of America and all ours. And it needs to be of the Federalist Party. He has very serious political intentions here. And anyway, so what he does is he gets the Greek Septuagint, and there are copies available by then, and an early Greek New Testament. Remember, the Septuagint was just the Old Testament, and then he has an early Greek New Testament. And he translates off of that, and it becomes this 4-volume Bible, because it has lots of explanatory notes in it. And some of the notes are very political. And, you know, saying, see, the Bible supports George Washington, the Bible supports the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson was an evil atheist, and, you know, was an adulterer and everything. So it's very, very big of the Federalist, and it's 4 volumes for the Bible, for the whole Bible, and only 1,000 copies are ever made. And of course, by the time the Federalist Party disappears, yeah, the point of the Bible kind of disappears. Yeah. So anyway, the next thing that happens is the American Bible Society started. So in 1816, on May 11th, the American Bible Society started, and it started by these prominent governmental and business leaders. You recognize some of the names: John Jay, Francis Scott Key, and their goal is to just ensure that everybody in the United States has a Bible. And for that, they decide to use the King James Bible, but they take out all the explanatory notes, because they feel the King James Bible, of all the ones out there, is the best translation, since King James had done so much to try to put it together. And so they decide to use that. And they're the first ones to make a pocket version. It's their pocket version that becomes what's called the Soldier's Bible that's used during the Civil War. And there are versions of it printed in French, German, Russian, Spanish, and Chinese because of all the different immigrants that are coming over to the United States. And so that everybody could get it. By 1835, 485 Bibles had been distributed, 485,000 Bibles are distributed. By 1886, 6.3 million are produced and distributed worldwide.
How many people were what was the population of the world then?
Well, the world was more than 6 million.
Right.
The world
Well, we're
was,
up to 9
yeah.
billion now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But the thing is they are actually doing mission trips out to other countries just to distribute the Bible. So this has no political points or anything like that. It's solely just to distribute the gospel and the Bible around. And the American Bible Society still exists today. It still exists today. So and it's this reason why the King James Bible becomes so, dominant in the United States. It's this reason right here. Now, Noah Webster, you ever hear of Webster's dictionary? So after the Civil War, Noah Webster, he decides to make his own Bible. And what he does though, is he just takes the King James Bible and he decides to update it in modern English. Get rid of all the these and the thous and stuff like that, and just update it into modern English so that people could read it. And so he does that, and it's called the Webster Bible, and it's popular. It gets printed up and distributed. Since Webster had so many different things distributed, it becomes a real dominant feature in a lot of the schools. The Webster Bible, along with its dictionary and spellers and everything like that. But it is still based on the King James Version. So now we're going to jump all the way into the late 19th century and early 20th century. And the first kind of real version that is an honest for goodness translation is this English Revised Version of 1885. And you get 50 Bible scholars from across the denominations in the United States and in England. And they come together and they get the most original manuscripts they can find. By that, talking about the most original manuscripts they can find that are in the British museums and in the United States Museum. One of the things that have been going on in the 1870s and the 1880s were these great expeditions to the Middle East. And a lot of archaeological discoveries had been made and manuscript evidence had been found and then brought back. And so they're gathering all those up, and this is funded by Cambridge University and Harvard University. And then Cambridge publishes the results in 1885, and it becomes the official Bible of the Episcopal Church.
Half Catholics.
Huh?
Those half Catholics.
No, it's not
I said the Episcopals are half Catholic.
It's not half Catholic. We're from the Episcopal Church.
Half Catholic?
We're not half Catholic.
That's what my mother described him as.
Half, what was the other half?
Just because they have some of the same.
Little roll
liturgy and
today,
stuff like
yeah.
Okay.
that. Okay,
They do make
anyway,
sense now.
I'm not gonna go down that
No,
rabbit hole.
Please.
So next we have the Darby Bible. This is John Darby. John Nelson Darby, the Anglican clergyman who leaves the denomination, moves to America, becomes a Bible teacher right here in Pennsylvania.
Leaves what denomination?
Anglican.
He's Anglican,
Oh, so he
which
leaves
is the
Anglican.
Episcopal, but he leaves it and comes here, and I guess you'd almost call him non-denominational anyway. But anyway, he teaches at the Philadelphia Bible College, and
Dorothy.
yeah, I mean, he lectured there and does writing there and hang out in Philly and wrote in Philadelphia.
What
Yeah.
year? I know.
In the late 1880s, 1870s, 60s and 70s. Yeah,
Was Philadelphia College of the Bible in
yeah,
practice then?
sure was.
1870?
Yeah, it was there during the Civil War. It was founded before the Civil War.
Okay.
And anyway, he makes all these different, his primary thing that he's working on, because he's not a full-time professor there, he's just kind of a lecturer and everything, is these translations of different books of the Bible. And he starts with Revelation. And Darby is the one who comes up with the whole thing of the the rapture, the tribulation for 7 years, one world government, all that stuff that we had just talked about in the thing. And that goes into his translation of Revelation, because he has a lot of explanatory notes and study notes in it. Well, that blooms then into his seeking to translate the rest of the Bible from what he says original languages. Now, one of the problems is we don't know exactly where he gets his manuscript. He does elicit the work of this guy, Samuel Tregelles, who's an English Bible scholar with the Brethren Church. And so he uses a lot of his work and everything in his translation. After his death, what happens is Darby never completes it. After his death, Darby's students gather up all his notes and stuff, and they put it together into what's called the Darby Bible. Now, one of the things in the Darby Bible was never to refer, one of the big interpretation things was everywhere you saw the word God, it was Jehovah. And the Jehovah Witnesses later will pick up that, and they will adopt, it becomes the basis for their New World Translation. Now, they don't follow the Darby Bible exactly. They make a lot of differences themselves in the New World Translation. Like there's no reference or any hints of the Trinity in the New World Translation. And there's no hint of Christ's resurrection in the New World Translation, because Christ is a man and he dies on a tree. It's just that he was the second Adam. So he was sinless, and he was the second Adam the way we're supposed to be. But anyway, that's the Darby Bible, and that's important because Darby's interpretation of Revelation and his explanatory notes will now be used in much later Bibles. Still to this day, in the NIV, they use a lot of Darby's Bible, the NIV Study Bible right there. They use a lot of his things. If you get the Ryrie Study Bible, they'll use a lot of Darby's explanatory notes. You'll still see them today and in through that. That's why that's kind of important. Now the Gideons get formed. Too bad Arlene's not here.
Yeah.
Hopefully maybe Arlene will watch it when the recording goes up. I was hoping Arlene would join us online, but oh well.
I wonder whether she has her laptop.
Yeah, or the means
She
to do
couldn't
it. She
find
could have
it.
done it with her phone, but
Yeah.
might not know how. But anyway, so this starts by a group of traveling salesmen. They're salesmen, traveling salesmen, okay? and Wisconsin. And they formed the organization, and I got a direct quote from their initial document there, encouraging each other to do the work of the Lord, focusing on who they are before God, and strengthening the power of their personal testimony for the Lord Jesus Christ. And they begin by distributing Bibles, and of course, since they are traveling salesmen, they place them in hotels. And that's predominantly. And the other place, because it was a big thing for traveling salesmen to stay at YMCAs when they were working for a company that couldn't afford things too well, was YMCAs. People slept there at YMCAs when they were traveling a lot of time. And then hospitals, nursing homes, college, public schools, and military. So it's kind of, as the organization grows, and you begin getting Bibles. Now they are also predominantly doing the King James Bible. And in fact, many of the Bibles that the Gideons were handing out in the beginning, before they had their own publishing business and group, that they were coming from the American Bible Society. And they were being an offshoot of the American Bible Society. Today, they are very separate organizations. And the Gideons are viewed as a very religious conservative group, while the American Bible Society is viewed as rather liberal nowadays, theologically. So the two are very, very separate. The Gideons will eventually get their own publishing house and cranking out their own Bibles. Yep. So the next is the American Standard Version. Now this is led by a guy named Dr. Philip Schaff. Schaff is a very important person. If you ever like, he wrote one of the very first multi-volume histories of the Christian church. If you ever really, I can just see your enthusiasm bubbling over here on your birthday. If you ever want to really get into Christian history and really read Schaff's work, it's a classic still to this day. But it's about a 30-volume work on church history.
That's a week's work for you, Joe.
Yeah, about 30 years worth.
There you go. Hey, Beth, there's a birthday present.
Right.
Christian book distributors still, they have them for sale. But anyway, so they get scholars from the Baptist, Congregationalist, Dutch Reform. I wish John Cady was here for the Dutch Reform side. Friends, Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterians, all these different denominations. They pull them together and to make this translation from the most original manuscript, again, to really get this hardcore American version, to get away from this darn King James version that was made by the English. Plus, by this time, in these 1880s and stuff, they've had all these different manuscripts that they found that King James didn't have. And they said, well, we need to make sure things are right and update it accordingly. And so they begin their work in 1875, and they got teams all around the world. It's financed by all these different universities. And they finally complete their work, and it's published in 1901. And it is officially adopted by all those different denominations that helped out. This is one of the things, the adoption of the American Standard within the Baptist denomination is one of the things that led to some of the splits in the Baptist denomination. Conservative Baptists hung on to the King James. We ain't gonna know liberal American Standard, rah, rah, rah. And so, and then you get the conservative Baptist versus the American Baptist. And the American Baptist adopted the American Standard Bible. And that whole split was all over the Bible and which version of the Bible they were adopting.
How could it really be that different?
It isn't.
Yeah, that's.
In terms of all the elements of faith, it isn't. But still today, there are some individuals that will say, oh, if you're not using this particular version, then you're sinning, you're in sin because you're not using the King James, or you're not using the NIV. The other week while Audrey was away, I had a call from a person that was checking out the church and wondering about it, and they asked me, what version of the Bible you use for your sermons? And I said, well, sometimes I use the NIV, sometimes I use the Revised Standard Version. Oh, you don't use the King James? No, not really. Oh, well, I'm not interested. Click.
That's just odd.
And that was that.
Yeah.
Okay, life goes on.
That's the way you feel?
But, you know, some people, and back then, it was even more so. What happens is because of the King James being so widely distributed, and everyone gets it from the earliest age, and some people even learned how to read from the Bible. And from the King James, it becomes a part. Now it becomes a thing of attachment, and this is the holy document. And anyone that changes the holy document, well, you are unholy.
Well, it tells you in the Bible you can't change any
Right.
words to it.
But
Well, the Catholics do that.
but you see, they think the King James is the holy thing, and that any kind of changes, you've done. And that's what led to denominational splits over this stuff. Even though with the American Standard Version, what happens is they are actually correcting some of the errors that were made in the King James. If you ever look like in the Gospel of Mark, you ever notice the one area in the Gospel of Mark where it says some of the versions don't have these verses?
Yeah.
That's because they find these earlier manuscripts and they go, Shazam! There's extra verses we didn't know about. We didn't see them in these earlier And so now how do we include them without, now it doesn't change the meaning or anything, but people, they get added. And so that's one of the things that people, translators wrestle with. But whole denominations get born just over the translation of the Bible and which one's used. It really is fighting words in so many ways with people, oddly enough. So in the 20th and 21st century, and then what happens is you get the New American Standard Version. That's just an updating of the English and the American Standard, focused on trying to make it accessible. The Living Bible was the next big thing. Now this is just Dr. Kenneth Taylor. And what he does is he takes the American Standard Version as the base, and it becomes a personal paraphrase to make it readable specifically for teenagers. His focus was in youth ministry and trying to make something that could work for Youth for Christ. And that's where the Living Bible gets born from. Now the New International Version, the National Association of Evangelicals, and several different Christian colleges and universities, and this one businessman named Howard Long, who ends up financing the thing primarily, they all come together in '65 and they want to make a contemporary English translation that's readable and is using the most latest manuscript evidence that's coming from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now understand, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they're discovered in the 1940s, it's still going on today, translating those documents and scrolls and discovering. And even though it was 20 years before this project started for the New International Version, not all the scrolls were translated yet. But anyway, it's the first version to actually make use of the manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's over 100 Bible scholars involved, 15 primary translators that are heads of teams. And they put it all together, works completed in 73, and that continues to be updated as there is additional evidence in the manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls and from other documents. So they, in the New International Version, they actually worked in a system of continual updates. That's why sometimes one NIV doesn't match another NIV. A word or something might be a little different. When you got, a few NIV versions around, it all depends on what year your NIV was put out. That NIV, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris?
I put a chat up, but I guess you didn't see it.
I guess not. Hold on.
My chat said, what about the Textus Receptus?
Yeah, now that would have been a long time ago with Erasmus. Erasmus made the Textus Receptus, and he was seeking to make it into Greek. And what they, with the NIV, they use, that's one of the documents they use. Because what Erasmus was doing was trying to put in the most original Greek, the New Testament. And so that's where the Textus Receptus came from. It comes from Erasmus back in the 1500s.
I've had people who are in favor of the King James Bible tell me that it's the most acceptable Bible because it's based on the Textus Receptus.
Well, and you can tell them that so's the NIV. The NIV made use of that too. And so did the American Standard.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, I didn't bring up
Be
the,
that way about it.
yeah, when, that would have been last session, I didn't bring up the Textus Receptus because basically it's not making a new translation or anything. All Erasmus did was he wanted to try to get the Greek version of the New Testament to what the Greek was in the time of Christ. And so Erasmus, as a scholar, had studied Greek. He had learned what the Greek language was at the time of Christ. And so he took the Greek New Testament at his time, and all he did was he kind of, instead of making it more accessible language, he worked it backwards and said, oh, here's what the most original complete manuscript of the New Testament would have looked like if it had been written all in the time of Christ.
Well, in the words of an older gentleman years ago, he said to me, look, the King James Version was good enough for St. Paul, is good enough for me.
Okay.
Well,
So there.
So there, all right. Absolutely. Well, then we get the Good News Bible, and that's also a group paraphrase. So that's not an individual paraphrase, it's a group paraphrase done of the King James Bible by the American Bible Society. There's this kind of mad rush in the 70s to try to get it all in a very understandable language to the Jesus generation.
It makes money.
Well, some say to make money, whatever, but to try to get into some see it as a witnessing, and you make it accessible so people, remember the American Bible Society didn't charge for handing out the Good News Bible. They weren't making money out of it, they were just handing them out for free, and a way of getting it out.
Well, your Gideons do too, don't they?
Pardon me?
Gideons do too.
Yeah, the Gideons do too,
Yeah.
yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. People sponsor it and they hand them out for free. Yeah. And then you got the New King James Bible. Thomas Nelson Publishers says, okay, let's take the old King James and just update it into contemporary English. And that's where the new King James came from. And that was done by a single publisher, Christian Publishing Group. The New Revised Standard Version, this is a group of leading Bible scholars from Catholicism, Lutheranism, Episcopal, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Orthodox, and even Judaism. Come together, and they're going to translate, again, the oldest manuscripts. And but here they're going to include all the books this time. You know, in Orthodox faith, we have 66 books in our canon. Catholics have 69. Orthodox have 74. There are different canons, and so they're going to translate all of them. And they're even going to translate a thing just for the Hebrew Bible. And so from here, what happens is they make different versions for different denominations. So you have an NRSV evangelical group. This is meant for all your non-denominational churches and your Southern Baptists and everything. You got an NRSV Anglican. That's meant for your Church of England, the Episcopalians, Anglicans, Methodists, stuff like that. You got, and Lutherans. You even got a Catholic version of the NSRV. And then you have an Orthodox version. And the NSRV is, I have an NSRV, I use that. It's primarily, it's academic and scholarly. That's its intent. So all the notes are more scholarly orienting, pointing you to different sources, a lot of delineation of word uses in the Greek and Hebrew and everything like that. The Catholic version, of course, aligns with Catholic doctrine. Same thing with the Orthodox, same thing with the Baptist and stuff. So in my version, you won't find any reference really to the Anglican version. You really won't find reference to the rapture. In the evangelical version of the NSRV, you will. They change the notes and all that kind of stuff, and explanation. Okay? But again, it's primarily meant as an academic, scholarly use type thing, meant to be used for pastors and stuff like that.
Leaves me out.
Yeah, it's not for us dummies.
Leaves me out.
Well, no, not necessarily, but I'm just saying. Now, the most recent translation, hey, the most recent real translation to go on is what's called the Net Bible, the New English translation, but also net as in the internet. And this is sponsored by the Society of Biblical Literature down in Philadelphia. It started in '95. You had this team of 20 translators, primarily from the Dallas Theological Seminary, which is a Baptist seminary. And it's been reviewed by the different staffs at several different Baptist seminaries. And it's completely online, public domain Bible with study notes and word search and everything like that. Now, as happens with these things, you can now purchase a Net Bible, though, just in hard copy. It was originally meant just to be a completely public domain online Bible to really reach out to everyone worldwide for free to for the Bible. But it turned into something you can actually purchase. It serves a really good source that I want to make sure you know. It serves as the basis for a thing called Bible Hub. So there's these two websites. One's called Bible Hub and the other one's called Bible.org. And they were both put together by this Bible Hub. What's great about Bible Hub is it's a free website source. You can get to the original Hebrew and Greek for any passage. And then they'll break everything down for you very nicely.
What was the other one?
That's Bible Hub. And what you can also do is then compare all translations if you want to too. So you could take a passage and you could say, let me see 5 different translations for it. And it will show you all 5 different translations, and it's free. It does the same thing that a very expensive software program called Logos does, but it's all free. Bible.org is a site put together primarily by Dallas Theological Seminary, but it's a very good in-depth Bible study site that's all free, with lots of good papers of different things in the Bible. But it uses the Net Bible too. If you wanted to download for free a copy of the Bible, of the Net Bible, you could do it from that site, bible.org. But that's the most recent honest for goodness translation that's been done. Okay. Now there's lots of updates of different things, you know, of NIV and all the different things, but those are just updates. They're done. Now getting into translations, I just have a little bit here about translations. And I want to point you to, you know, basically, if you go to the page 4 there, under the story, you know, questions of language. So you got to remember what you're doing in all translation is you got your original language and then the receptor language. The receptor is the one that you're translating it into. And there's changes obviously in the words and in the grammar and in idioms. There's all this historical difference between the cultural values and norms from when people wrote it to the different historical events that are going on. And so your translations are literal translations or free translations or dynamic equivalent. Literal, it's word for word, and then the exact meaning of each word and the placing of words into the receptor's language and grammatical structure.
What's an idiom?
An idiom?
Yeah, what's an idiom?
Yeah, so if you say, oh, give me a saying that people say.
You're the apple of my eye.
Yeah, the apple of my eye, that's an idiom. You see, and we would know that in this time, but imagine people 2,000 years from now,
Yeah, yeah.
you have written down, like, what's this mean, an apple of an eye?
So almost.
A deaf idiom that people, is this the sign for train?
Mm-hmm.
Gone. And, you know, we might say you missed the boat.
Oh, okay.
That's their way of saying you missed the boat, but they would say you missed the train.
Okay.
Yep. And that's a deaf idiom. That equivalent in our language would be missed the boat. So if you were translating it, you would say, you wouldn't say missed train, you would say you missed the boat, because that would be something you'd understand and get the same concept across.
Like Elijah with the chariot of fire.
Correct, some see it, yeah, and this is where the thing of symbols. So do you translate word for word, or are you trying to translate the meaning that the person was trying to convey when they passed it on? And this is where, but when you go for the meaning of people, are you speculating as to what the person meant? And that becomes a dangerous thing.
So it's best to leave it the way it was.
Unless you know for sure what was meant.
Well, you can't. Can you?
Well, this is where this is some of the place where church tradition comes into play. Cause you say, okay, if the apostles, so a big one, a real big one for people is the virgin birth. So the literal translation of that, in the most literal sense, is young woman.
Got lucky on her wedding night.
So now the question becomes, is that really a virgin? Is the proper was the concept of young woman virgin for Mary? Or were they just saying she was a young woman, and so this whole idea of her being a virgin is wrong? But this is, so here what we have though is church tradition, which tells us, and we can look back all the way to a guy named Clement and everything, who learned from Peter, the Apostle Peter, who writes down she was a virgin. And so we say, in their time, and then you take a look at other documents of the time and stuff, and you see, oh, well, when they use it in this way, they mean virgin. And so then we say, well, that's what they meant there, was virgin. But now, today, in some translations, you have people saying, no, it should be young woman, because if you look back at that manuscript, that's literally what those words say, is young woman. So if you're going to be literal, that's what it should say, is young woman. And they deny the virgin birth then.
And then the congregation splits up.
And the congregation splits up. But I'm just saying, but
So it should be the young woman who's a virgin.
what I'm saying is all that goes into translation. That's not just, so if you're going to translate and you're trying to get the concept, you have to go and look at things in the historical time, in their cultural time. How was the word used? Also, how did other people see that were closer to the events than we are? We're 1,000 some years away, more a couple thousand years away. Well, Clement was only 100 years away when he wrote about it, and he saw it as being a virgin, so therefore, yeah, we'll go with virgin. That's the most reasonable thing. And this is where, you can't just say, oh, well, I want a literal translation, because, well, you may get it something totally different than you think you're going to get. And so I made a little diagram for you of the different translations, literal to paraphrase, free and dynamic equivalents. Okay, so there you kind of see this whole thing. Okay, and you can see where people are at. So the dynamic equivalent, they're trying to put it all conceptually into the person's thing in the NIV. And that's another one of the strengths of an NIV. Okay, so that's the thing. Now I got a lot of different things you can read. We're running out of time, but you can just read about Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek and all the difficulties. If you look on your last page here, this kind of shows things in action, just so you get. I'm just trying to give you a sense of this translating business and what makes it difficult and why there's controversy. So 2 Corinthians 11:33 through 12:1. So word for word, right up above there, you got the Greek, and it would be, and in basket, lowered I wall through, and escape his hand, I tell, boast, it, yes, be necessary, not expedient, will come, to Lord visions, and Lord revelations know I. That would be literal, word for word, not putting it in our order or anything like that. And then here you got the King James, the NIV, the Living Translation, and the Message. The living thing is the Living Bible, Martin, the Message, the paraphrase. Okay. And you can see the difference. And through a window in the basket was I let down by the wall, and escaped his hands. It is not expedient for me, doubtless to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. This is Paul being let down by a basket. And I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. And I had to be lowered in a basket through a window in the city wall to escape him. The boasting will do no good, and I must go on. I will reluctantly tell about visions and revelations from the Lord. And then the Message, which is just Gene Patterson. The Message is a paraphrase. Guy by the name of Gene Patterson just sat down and said, here's what I think it means to this. And he just wrote out his own thoughts as to how he worded. And that's an exercise you can do. You know, you can read a Bible passage and then say, well, how would I write that in my own words to myself? As a way of trying to understand it and study the Bible. And that's all he was doing. You gotta just understand the limitation of that, of what. Okay.
Wow.
So there you go. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? What you saying, Linda? Okay.
She's saying, make sure Steve behaves himself.
All right.
Okay.
Good enough. Good seeing you guys again. Yep. Happy church hunting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we may get, old and go to a Wesleyan church this coming week.
Ah. Okay.
Try a Catholic one.
Joe just said try Catholic.
Dude, not happening.
Oh, okay. Well, if you don't mind traveling several hours, you could always come back up to Readers. See ya.
Yeah,
Okay, bye-bye. And see you, Gail and Avon.
And congratulations on your new grandbaby.
Okay, let me get this.
3 days old.
Sunday morning.
Oh, Sunday morning.